The morning air felt heavy with emotion as William and Kate stepped out of their black car at St. Mary's Hospital. The building stood tall against the gray London sky, its windows reflecting the pale sunlight that struggled to break through the clouds. Kate pulled her navy coat tighter around herself, not from the cold, but from the nervous energy that had been building inside her chest since they woke up that morning. William walked beside her, his usually confident stride slightly hesitant. As they approached the main entrance, he had been unusually quiet during the car ride, staring out the window at the busy streets, filled with people going about their normal Tuesday morning routines. Those people had no idea what William and Kate were about to face, and honestly, neither did they. Not really. The idea for this visit had come up 3 months ago during a charity meeting. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the head of pediatric oncology at St. Mary's, had made a simple request that had stayed with them ever since. She needed people who could bring hope to the children in her ward, children who were fighting battles that most adults could never imagine facing. Some of these kids had been in the hospital for months, others for over a year. Their days were filled with treatments, medications, and procedures that would make grown men cry. Kate had immediately said yes when Dr. Mitchell explained the situation. Her own children were healthy and happy at home, probably getting ready for school right now with their nanny helping them brush their teeth and pack their school bags. The contrast felt almost cruel. Why did some children get to worry about homework and playground games while others had to think about things no child should ever have to think about? As they walked through the automatic doors, the familiar hospital smell hit them immediately. It was that mix of cleaning products and something else, something that seemed to carry the weight of all the emotions that had passed through these halls. William noticed how Kate's breathing changed slightly, becoming more shallow as they made their way to the elevator that would take them to the 4th floor. That the elevator ride felt longer than it probably was. Neither of them spoke, but William reached over and took Kate's hand. Her fingers were cold despite the warm building, and he could feel the slight tremor that ran through them. He squeezed gently, trying to offer comfort even though he needed just as much reassurance as she did. When the elevator doors opened, they were greeted by walls covered in colorful artwork, handprints in bright paint, drawings of rainbows and flowers, and letters from children who had been patients here. The cheerful decorations felt like they were trying hard to make everyone forget where they were and why they were here. Dr. Mitchell was waiting for them at the nurses' station. She was a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes that had seen too much sadness but somehow still held warmth and hope. Her graying hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore scrubs decorated with tiny cartoon animals that were probably meant to make the children smile. "Thank you both for coming," she said as she shook their hands. "I know this isn't easy, but what you're doing today will mean more to these children than you can possibly imagine." Some of them have been looking forward to this visit for weeks. They've been practicing what they want to say to you and asking their nurses to help them look their best. Dr. Mitchell began walking them down the hallway, past room after room with doors that were either closed or slightly open, revealing glimpses of small figures in hospital beds surrounded by machines and medical equipment. The sounds were different here too. Instead of the usual chatter and laughter you might expect to hear around children, there was a quieter atmosphere punctuated by the soft beeping of monitors and the gentle hum of medical devices. "The first thing you need to know," Dr. Mitchell continued as they walked, "is that these children are incredibly brave. They face each day with a strength that puts most adults to shame, but they're still kids. They want to play games, hear stories, and feel like someone cares about them beyond their medical condition. They want to feel normal, even if it's just for a few minutes." Kate felt her throat tighten as they passed a room where she could see a small boy, probably no older than 7, sitting up in bed with tubes running from his nose. He was coloring in a book, his tongue sticking out slightly. In concentration, the sight made her think of her own son when he was working on his art projects at the kitchen table, completely absorbed in getting every detail just right. William was struggling with his own emotions as they continued down the hall. Through another doorway, he glimpsed a little girl with no hair, wearing a bright pink hat, playing with dolls on her hospital bed. She was making up voices for each character, creating elaborate storylines that seemed to transport her away from the reality of where she was. The innocence and creativity in the face of such serious circumstances made his chest feel tight. Dr. Mitchell stopped in front of a door marked with a sign that read Sunshine Room. "This is where we'll start," she said. "We have 3 children in here who are having a good day today. That's important to understand. We only bring visitors when the children are feeling well enough to enjoy the company. On bad days, they need rest and quiet and space to heal. As they prepared to enter the room, Kate took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. She had given speeches to hundreds of people, attended countless formal events, and faced cameras and crowds without fear. But walking into a room full of sick children felt more daunting than anything she had ever done before. William checked his watch and realized they had been in the hospital for less than 15 minutes, but it already felt like hours. The emotional weight of the place seemed to slow down time, making every moment feel more significant and heavy with meaning. Dr. Mitchell reached for the door handle and paused. "Remember," she said quietly, "they don't need your pity. They need your genuine interest and care. Ask them about their hobbies, their favorite movies, what they want to be when they grow up. Treat them like the amazing kids they are, not like patients to feel sorry for." With that advice hanging in the air between them, she opened the door to begin what would become one of the most emotionally challenging and ultimately life-changing days of William and Kate's lives. The Sunshine Room lived up to its name with bright yellow walls and cartoon sun stickers placed at child height around the room. 3 hospital beds were arranged in a semicircle, each occupied by a young patient who looked up eagerly as William and Kate entered. The afternoon light, streaming through the large windows, created a warm glow that seemed to soften the clinical feel of the medical equipment surrounding each bed. The first child they met was Emma, an 8-year-old girl with wispy blonde hair that was just starting to grow back after her recent chemotherapy treatments. She wore a hospital gown decorated with tiny butterflies and had arranged her few personal belongings on the bedside table with careful precision. A worn stuffed rabbit sat propped against her pillow, and several get-well cards were taped to the wall behind her bed. Emma's face lit up when she saw Kate approaching her bed. She had been practicing what she wanted to say for days, but now that the moment was here, she suddenly felt shy and tucked her chin toward her chest. Kate sat down in the chair beside the bed and spoke in the same gentle voice she used with her own children at bedtime. "Hello, Emma," Kate said softly. "I heard you like to draw pictures. Could you show me some of your artwork?" Emma's eyes brightened immediately, and she reached for a folder that contained dozens of colorful drawings. Each picture told a story about her life in the hospital, but they were filled with rainbows and flowers and happy animals. Instead of sadness, William had moved to the second bed, where 12-year-old Marcus was sitting up excitedly. Marcus had been at the hospital for 6 months, and his enthusiasm for visitors was infectious despite his obvious physical weakness. He wore a baseball cap to cover his bald head, and the cap was covered with pins from different airplane companies that visitors had brought him over the months. "I want to be a pilot when I grow up," Marcus announced proudly to William. "I know everything about airplanes. Did you know that the biggest passenger airplane is the Airbus A380, and it can carry more than 800 people?" William found himself genuinely impressed by the boy's knowledge and spent several minutes listening to Marcus explain the differences between various aircraft engines. The conversation flowed easily as Marcus described his dreams of flying around the world and visiting every country. He had a map on his bedside table with pins marking all the places he wanted to visit someday. William noticed that Marcus never mentioned his illness or questioned whether his dreams were realistic. In his mind, becoming a pilot was not a possibility, but a certainty. At the third bed, Kate had finished looking at Emma's drawings and moved to meet Sarah, a 10-year-old girl who was quieter than the other 2 children. Sarah had been in the hospital for 8 months, longer than most patients. In the pediatric ward, she had a collection of books stacked beside her bed and was currently reading a story about magical kingdoms and brave princesses. Kate asked Sarah about her favorite books, and the girl's face transformed as she began describing the adventures she had read about. She explained how reading helped her travel to different worlds without leaving her hospital bed. Sometimes when the treatments made her feel sick, she would close her eyes and imagine herself as one of the characters in her stories, going on quests and solving problems and living happily ever after. Dr. Mitchell watched from the doorway as William and Kate spent time with each child. She had seen many visitors come and go over the years, and she could tell immediately when someone was genuinely connecting with the patients, versus when they were just going through the motions. William and Kate were clearly affected by what they were seeing, but they were also fully present with each child, giving them individual attention and treating them as unique people rather than just sick kids. After spending nearly an hour in the Sunshine Room, Dr. Mitchell gently indicated that it was time to move on. There were other children waiting to meet them, and the schedule needed to be carefully managed to ensure that no one got overtired. The 3 children in the Sunshine Room called out goodbye and thank you as William and Kate prepared to leave, and Emma held up one of her drawings as a gift. The next stop was a private room where they met 6-year-old James, who had been at the hospital for 3 months. James was having a particularly difficult day with his treatment, and he was connected to several machines that monitored his vital signs and delivered medication through tubes. Despite his obvious discomfort, he managed a small smile when William sat down beside his bed. James was too weak for much conversation, but he listened with wide eyes as William told him stories about adventures and travels. Kate sat on the other side of the bed and gently held the little boy's hand while William spoke. James drifted in and out of sleep during their visit, but each time he opened his eyes, he seemed comforted to find them still there beside him. The emotional weight of the visit was starting to show on both William and Kate. Kate excused herself to step into the hallway for a moment, and William could see her wiping her eyes as she looked out the window toward the busy street below. When she returned, her composure was back in place. but William could see the strain in her expression. They continued their rounds, meeting child after child who faced each day with remarkable courage. There was 9-year-old Lisa who had decorated her room with pictures of horses and dreamed of learning to ride someday. There was 7-year-old David who collected toy cars and had arranged them in elaborate parking lots on his hospital table. Each child had their own personality, their own interests, and their own way of coping with circumstances that would overwhelm most adults. By late afternoon, William and Kate had visited 12 children, and the emotional toll was becoming harder to hide. They had laughed with the kids, played simple games, and listened to countless stories about hopes and dreams and favorite things. But underneath every interaction was the reality that these children were fighting for their lives, and some of them might not win that fight. Dr. Mitchell could see that both visitors were reaching their emotional limits. She had one more room to show them, but she wanted to prepare them for what would be perhaps the most challenging encounter of the day. The child in the final room had been asking about their visit all week, but the situation there was more complicated than any of the others they had seen. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly as Dr. Mitchell led William and Kate toward the next section of the pediatric ward. The afternoon light had begun to fade, casting longer shadows through the windows and giving the hospital corridors a more somber feeling. Kate noticed her legs felt heavier with each step, as if the emotional weight of the past few hours was physically weighing her down. They stopped outside a room, marked with a small nameplate that read Lily Thompson, age 6. Through the slightly open door, they could hear the soft sound of a child humming a tune that sounded familiar but sad. Dr. Mitchell paused before explaining the situation, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper so the child inside would not overhear. Lily has been with us for 4 months now, Dr. Mitchell began carefully. She was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of cancer, and the treatments have been extremely difficult for someone so young. The most challenging part of Lily's situation is that her parents stopped visiting about 6 weeks ago. They said they couldn't bear to watch her suffer anymore, and they haven't been back since. Kate felt her heart sink at this information. She could not imagine abandoning a child, especially one who was fighting such a terrible battle. The thought of a 6-year-old girl facing her darkest moments without her parents there to comfort her seemed impossibly cruel. William's jaw tightened as he processed what Dr. Mitchell was telling them. The nursing staff has become like family to Lily. Dr. Mitchell continued. She's incredibly sweet and brave, but she asks about her mommy and daddy every day. We've tried to explain that sometimes parents need time to deal with their own feelings, but she doesn't really understand why they don't come to see her anymore. As they prepared to enter the room, Dr. Mitchell explained that Lily had been particularly excited about their visit. She had been practicing curtsying like a princess and had asked the nurses to help her brush her hair, even though most of it had fallen out from the chemotherapy treatments. The little girl had been looking forward to this moment for days. William pushed the door open gently, and they stepped into a room that was noticeably different from the others they had visited. Where the other rooms had been filled with cards and gifts and personal items from family members, Lily's room was sparse. The walls were mostly bare, except for a few drawings that the nurses had helped her make. Her bedside table held only the basic necessities and a single worn teddy bear that looked like it had been loved for many years. Lily was sitting up in her hospital bed, wearing a pink nightgown that was several sizes too big for her tiny frame. A colorful knit hat covered her head, and her thin arms were wrapped around the teddy bear. When she saw William and Kate enter, her entire face transformed with joy and excitement. "Are you really a prince and princess?" Lily asked with wide eyes, her voice barely above a whisper due to the treatments that had affected her throat. Kate felt tears threatening to spill over as she approached the bed, but she managed to keep her voice steady and warm. "We're just regular people who wanted to come and meet you," Kate replied as she sat down in the chair beside Lily's bed. "But I heard you're the real princess in this room." Lily giggled softly at this, and the sound was so pure and innocent that it made William's chest ache with emotion. Lily began talking about her teddy bear, whose name was Mr. Buttons, and how he had been her best friend since she was a baby. She explained that Mr. Buttons was very brave and helped her feel less scared when the doctors had to do procedures that hurt. She made up voices for the teddy bear and had entire conversations with him. Throughout the day, William sat on the other side of the bed and listened as Lily told them about her favorite cartoons and how she liked to color pictures of flowers and butterflies. She showed them a coloring book that was nearly finished, with each page carefully completed in bright crayons. Her artwork was surprisingly good for someone so young, with attention to detail that showed she spent long hours working on each picture. The conversation continued for nearly 30 minutes, with Lily chattering away about various topics while William and Kate gave her their complete attention. She told them about her dreams of having a pet kitten someday, and how she wanted to learn to ride a bicycle when she got better. Her optimism was heartbreaking given the severity of her condition. As their visit progressed, Lily began to show signs of fatigue. The treatments she received were exhausting, and even talking for extended periods was difficult for her. Kate noticed that the little girl kept glancing toward the door, as if hoping someone else might walk through it. "Do you think my mommy and daddy will come see me soon?" Lily asked quietly, her small voice filled with hope and confusion. "I've been very good, and I haven't cried during my treatments this week. Maybe, if I'm good enough, they'll want to visit me again." Kate felt her heart break completely at this question. She looked at William, who was struggling to maintain his composure. How could they possibly explain to a 6-year-old child that sometimes adults make decisions that don't make sense, especially when those decisions hurt innocent children who need love and support more than anything else? Kate reached over and gently took Lily's small hand in hers. "Your mommy and daddy love you very much," she said carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups get scared and don't know how to handle difficult situations. But you have so many people here who care about you and think you're absolutely wonderful." Lily seemed to accept this explanation, but Kate could see the sadness in her eyes. The little girl was clearly intelligent enough to understand that something was wrong, even if she couldn't fully grasp why her parents had stopped coming to see her. As their visit with Lily came to an end, she asked Kate if she would read her a bedtime story. Kate chose a book about a brave little rabbit who went on adventures, and she read in a gentle voice while Lily curled up with Mr. Buttons and listened with sleepy eyes. When the story was finished, Lily gave both William and Kate careful hugs, being mindful of the tubes and wires that were attached to her small body. She thanked them for coming to see her and made them promise to visit again soon if they could. Walking out of Lily's room, both William and Kate were visibly shaken by the encounter. The combination of the child's sweetness and bravery, along with the knowledge that she had been abandoned by her parents during the most difficult time of her life, was almost too much to bear. The corridor felt different as William and Kate walked away from Lily's room. The cheerful decorations on the walls now seemed to blur together, and the soft lighting that had felt warm earlier now cast shadows that seemed to mirror the heaviness in their hearts. Kate's steps had become slower, more deliberate, as if each footfall required conscious effort to continue moving forward. William found himself struggling with emotions he had never experienced before. He had faced difficult situations in his public life, had dealt with tragedy and loss, but nothing had prepared him for the raw innocence of a 6-year-old child asking why her parents had stopped loving her. The question echoed in his mind, and he realized there was no good answer that would make sense to someone so young. Dr. Mitchell walked beside them in respectful silence, understanding that they needed time to process what they had just experienced. She had witnessed this reaction countless times from visitors who came to the pediatric ward with good intentions but left feeling overwhelmed by the reality of childhood, illness, and the complex emotions that surrounded it. They passed several more rooms, each containing another story of courage and struggle. Through partially open doors, they could glimpse other young patients resting, playing quietly, or receiving treatments from nurses who moved with practiced efficiency and genuine caring. The sounds of the ward had become a familiar background. Now, the beeping of monitors and quiet conversations creating a rhythm that spoke of life continuing despite enormous challenges. Kate stopped suddenly at a window that looked out over the hospital courtyard. Below, she could see people coming and going, some arriving with flowers and balloons, others leaving with expressions of worry or relief. The normal world continued its pace, while inside these walls, children fought battles that would test the strongest adults. "I need a moment," Kate said quietly to William, her voice catching slightly on the words. She had maintained her composure throughout their visits, but the accumulation of sadness and the particular heartbreak of Lily's situation had finally broken through her carefully constructed emotional barriers. William nodded and stood beside her at the window, not speaking but offering his presence as support. They both understood that this experience was changing them in ways they had not anticipated. The theoretical knowledge of childhood illness was completely different from the reality of looking into the eyes of sick children and seeing their hope, their fear, and their incredible resilience. Dr. Mitchell approached them carefully, recognizing the signs of emotional overload that she had seen in many visitors over the years. She carried a small box of tissues, which she offered to Kate without comment. The simple gesture of kindness was almost too much, and Kate found herself fighting back tears that had been building for hours. "I know this is difficult," Dr. Mitchell said gently. "What you're feeling right now is completely normal. These children touch everyone who meets them, and it's impossible to remain unchanged after spending time with them. The fact that you're so affected shows that you truly care, and that means everything to these kids." William turned away from the window and looked down the hallway toward the rooms they had visited. In each one, a child was continuing their fight, facing another day of treatments and uncertainty with more courage than he had ever been called upon to show. The contrast between their privileged life and the struggles of these young patients felt almost overwhelming. As they continued their walk through the ward, they encountered more staff members who shared brief stories about the children they cared for. There was the night nurse who stayed late to comfort kids who had nightmares, the art therapist who helped patients express their feelings through creative projects, and the volunteer who brought therapy dogs to visit once a week. Each person they met was dedicated to making life better for these children. But William and Kate could see the toll that constant exposure to suffering took on everyone who worked here. The staff maintained professional smiles and upbeat attitudes, but there was a weariness in their eyes that spoke of too many goodbyes and too many empty beds that had once held laughing children. They visited 2 more rooms, meeting children who were at different stages of their treatment journeys. 10-year-old Michael was preparing to go home after successfully completing his therapy, and his excitement was infectious as he packed his belongings and talked about returning to school. His recovery offered a glimpse of hope that reminded William and Kate that not every story in this place ended in tragedy. In contrast, 8-year-old Amanda was just beginning her treatment journey, and her parents sat beside her bed looking shell-shocked and terrified. They had just received the diagnosis 2 days ago, and the reality of what lay ahead for their daughter was still sinking in. Kate spent time talking with Amanda's mother, offering what comfort she could to someone who was facing every parent's worst nightmare. The afternoon was drawing to a close, and William could feel exhaustion settling into his bones. It was not physical tiredness, but emotional fatigue from absorbing so much sadness and trying to offer hope and comfort when he felt overwhelmed himself. Kate moved through the final visits with determination, but he could see the strain in her posture and the way she held her shoulders slightly higher than usual. Dr. Mitchell began preparing them for their departure, explaining that there was one final room she wanted them to visit before they left. She had saved this particular patient for last, she explained, because this child had been asking about their visit all week but had been too shy to meet them earlier in the day. The room was at the end of the corridor, separated from the others by a short hallway that seemed to muffle the sounds of the busy ward. As they approached, they could hear the soft sound of singing coming from within, a young voice carrying a melody that seemed to float through the air with surprising strength. And Beauty. William hesitated at the door, his hand hovering over the handle. After everything they had experienced that day, he was not sure his heart could absorb any more sadness. Kate stood beside him, her eyes already showing the strain of their emotional journey, both of them bracing themselves for what might be their most difficult encounter yet. Dr. Mitchell smiled mysteriously as she gestured toward the door. "This child is very special," she said quietly. "What you're about to see will surprise you in ways you cannot imagine. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected places." With those words hanging in the air between them, William slowly reached for the door handle, preparing to meet the child whose story would complete their transformative day at St. Mary's Hospital. William's hand trembled slightly as he pushed the door open, the soft singing growing clearer as they stepped into the room. What they discovered inside was completely different from anything they had expected or prepared themselves for throughout their emotionally draining day at the hospital. The room was filled with warm afternoon sunlight streaming through large windows, and instead of the typical single hospital bed, there were several small chairs arranged in a circle on a colorful carpet. In the center of this circle sat a 9-year-old boy named Thomas, but he was not alone. Surrounding him were 6 other children from various rooms throughout the ward, all listening intently as Thomas continued his gentle song. Thomas had been at St. Mary's Hospital for over a year, longer than almost any other patient in the pediatric wing. His condition was serious and required ongoing treatment, but unlike many of the other children they had met, Thomas had found a way to bring joy and comfort to everyone around him. Every afternoon when he felt strong enough, he would invite other young patients to join him in what the staff had come to call the friendship circle. Dr. Mitchell whispered quietly to William and Kate as they stood in the doorway, explaining that Thomas had started this tradition several months ago when he noticed how lonely and scared some of the newer patients seemed. Without any prompting from adults, he had begun reaching out to other children, offering to share stories, songs, and games that helped distract them from their treatments and worries. As Thomas finished his song, he looked up and noticed William and Kate standing at the entrance to the room. His face lit up with genuine excitement, but instead of focusing on himself, he immediately began introducing the other children in the circle. There was Maria, who had been nervous about her surgery, scheduled for the next day. There was Kevin, who had just started his treatment and was homesick for his family. Each child received Thomas's individual attention and care. What struck William and Kate most powerfully was not just Thomas's kindness, but the transformation they could see in the other children. Maria, who had been anxious and withdrawn when they met her earlier, was now smiling and participating in the group activities. Kevin, who had been crying for his parents just hours before, was laughing at Thomas's gentle jokes and silly faces. Thomas had created something magical in that room, a space where children could be children despite their circumstances. He had organized games that could be played from wheelchairs or hospital beds, songs that everyone could participate in regardless of their energy levels, and stories that transported everyone to worlds far away from medical procedures and frightening diagnoses. As William and Kate joined the circle, sitting cross-legged on the carpet like the children, Thomas began explaining his philosophy with the wisdom of someone much older than his 9 years. He told them that being sick was scary and lonely, but it was much easier when you had friends who understood what you were going through. He had learned that helping others made him feel stronger and happier than focusing on his own problems. The other children in the circle began sharing their own stories about how Thomas had helped them. Maria talked about how he had held her hand during a particularly difficult treatment and sung to her until she fell asleep. Kevin described how Thomas had taught him a special breathing technique that helped when he felt scared or overwhelmed. Kate found herself amazed by the depth of compassion and maturity these children displayed. They had faced experiences that would challenge the strongest adults, yet they had found ways to support and care for each other. Thomas had somehow created a community of healing that went beyond medical treatment to address the emotional and spiritual needs of young patients. As the afternoon continued, Thomas organized a game where each child shared something they were grateful for, despite their difficult circumstances. The responses were profound and humbling. Maria was grateful for nurses who made her laugh. Kevin was thankful for the therapy dogs that visited each week. Another child appreciated the art supplies that helped her express her feelings through drawings. When it came to Thomas's turn, he looked directly at William and Kate and said he was grateful for visitors who cared enough to spend time with sick children. He explained that knowing people from the outside world thought about them and wanted to help made all the patients feel less forgotten and more hopeful about their futures. The impact of Thomas's words hit both William and Kate with unexpected force. Throughout their visit, they had been focused on what they could give to these children, but Thomas had shown them something much more powerful. These young patients had gifts to offer the world, lessons about courage and kindness and resilience that healthy people desperately needed to learn. William realized that his tears were no longer tears of sadness, but tears of inspiration and hope. He had come to the hospital expecting to encounter tragedy and suffering, and while those elements were certainly present, what he had ultimately discovered was the incredible strength of the human spirit, especially as demonstrated by children who refused to let their circumstances define their capacity for joy and generosity. Kate watched as Thomas helped organize the other children for their return to their individual rooms, making sure each one had what they needed and promising to see them again the next day if he was feeling well enough. His natural leadership and caring instincts were remarkable, and she found herself wondering what kind of impact he might have on the world if given the chance to grow up and pursue his dreams. As the friendship circle disbanded and the children began returning to their rooms with the help of nurses and volunteers, Thomas approached William and Kate with a small gift he had made. It was a simple drawing, but it showed all the children in the ward holding hands in a circle, with words written in careful 9-year-old handwriting that read, "We are stronger together." Dr. Mitchell watched from the doorway as William and Kate said goodbye to Thomas, both of them visibly transformed by what they had experienced in that room. The day had begun with their intention to bring comfort and hope to sick children, but it had ended with them receiving far more than they had given. Walking back through the hospital corridors toward the exit, William and Kate moved with a different energy than they had carried during their arrival. The sadness and heartbreak were still there, but they were now accompanied by something else, something that felt like purpose and determination and a deep understanding of what really mattered in life. The tears they had held back throughout the day finally came, but they were tears of gratitude and inspiration rather than despair. They had discovered that even in the darkest circumstances, the human capacity for love and hope could create miracles that no medical treatment could achieve.